Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I think we'll go ahead and get started as more people trickle in, but welcome. We are so glad you're all able to be here for our first installment of our Pharmy USP 800 Preparedness webinar. We're excited to kick off this series right on the heels of some important news that came yesterday. And we know that USP 800 compliance can bring about a lot of unknowns for you and your organization. And we pretty much started this series to bring conversation and community so we can all learn and be prepared when November comes. So today's webinar will kick off the series and it will continue on Thursdays at noon through the end of May. Again, we're so glad you're here. And now I'll give a little introduction to our speakers for today. So first off, I'd like to introduce our Pharmy CEO, Laura Paxton. She's worked in the healthcare industry for over 35 years. And she created our Pharmy alongside her husband, John, following the loss of a family member due to med error. And since then, she's made it her mission to keep patients safe and healthcare workers safe through our Pharmy suite of softwares and services. We're thankful for her passion and mission, and we're excited to hear from her today. And next, you'll see Charlene Kristen. Charlene is a customer experience specialist with our Pharmy, and she has over 30 years of experience as a certified pharmacy technician, 20 of those with the Duke system. And she was once a client of our Pharmy's, but she joined our team in 2020. She's revolutionized our company, and she's a critical asset. And we are also excited to learn from her as well. So a little housekeeping before we start. We will have Q&As as we go along. And please note the Q&A section in your Zoom toolbar down below. And please feel free to ask questions at any time. We will be monitoring and answering those as we go along. And we'll also have some polling questions today. So please make sure to engage with the polls just so we can get a bigger understanding of how we can help you. Then after the webinar, we will send all those questions and answers out just so everyone can be aware. But again, thank you for being here today. And now I'll pass it off to Laura.
Thank you, Carrie Fleming, for those lovely introductions. And thank you to all of you who have joined us today. We appreciate it greatly. And just to get started, what I'd like to tell you about is why we're even having this series of webinars and how we got here. And the background on this is in March of 2018, one of our clients for our formulary software called us and asked us if we would write software for him for USP 800. And he needed this software because the person who was in charge of USP 800 in his organization had left to go to another hospital, and no one in the hospital knew where any of the information was or knew how to update the information. So he was like, I don't need this to happen again. I need software. And one of the things, so we got to work on writing some software on this topic. And as we wrote this software, one of the things that we realized with this mandate is that you all have to be in tune with the FDA, OSHA, EPA, NIOSH, ONS, ASHP. I know I'm forgetting some of this alphabet soup of agencies that are telling you what to do, but there's a lot of information, a lot of advisors coming at you. So we decided to have a webinar to talk about this because I've been in the pharmacy world for 22 years now. And throughout that history, I've noticed that pharmacists are so willing to share and talk about best practices. And I'm not seeing a lot of information sharing going on this topic. So we've had the opportunity to install our software in hundreds of hospitals. We've had the chance to see how different people are approaching aspects of the USP 800 issue, and I want to get a conversation started. So that's why we're doing this. It's interesting to see with these webinars, what we want to really highlight is what are the questions that we're getting from you all? What are the things that we see as we create these databases for our clients that we can share with you all as you walk down this road yourself to help you understand what we're going to talk about next week. Where are the gaps? So we've worked really hard with our committee, or maybe it's just one or two people. And where are the gaps? What have we missed here? So we're going to talk about that in our webinar next week. On April the 20th, we're going to talk about assessments of risk because all of you are approaching that differently. What are the requirements for an assessment to assess a drug? And how do you create and update a hazardous drug list? Sharing with you how other people have done that and what we've seen with some best practices. Most critically, how do we get this information at the point of care so a nurse can access it? Because everyone on this call, if you're on this call, it means that you have an interest in this topic and you've all seen those Excel spreadsheets, I feel certain. The question is, how do we take all of that information that's in that Excel spreadsheet, put it inside the electronic health record so that nurses and pharmacists and whoever needs to see this information can access it easily. And then when what do we need to know when the inspectors come to visit? And then finally on May 25th, we'll do a wrap up. And it promises to be a very interesting series, and we hope you find something valuable in all of this. So what have we learned so far? Since March of 2018, we've been doing surveys with pharmacy directors and designated persons, operations people, anyone involved in this USP 800 mandate. We've been asking you all questions, and what we found is that only 15% of the people we've asked have their hazardous drug information inside the electronic health record, which is the most important place that it needs to be. And because here's what we've seen. If it's not inside the electronic health record, what happens is people kick the can down the road and they handle those drugs and maybe they don't handle them properly and put themselves at risk. And this is the truth. We've actually had instances where we've heard of nurses going out to Google to find that information and they find incorrect information. So let's work real hard to make sure this information is inside the electronic health record. 75% of the people we've talked to don't have a hazardous drug committee. They have maybe one person, maybe two people. And what we've seen also is as time marches on, and we have seen this with our clients, maybe they've got one or two people doing this, but when we start working through those Excel spreadsheets and having these conversations, we see more of a committee come to be formed in that instance. Our people have told us that 70% of them believe that it will take more than a year to prepare for USP 800. That's just the truth. When you think about the volume of information that you guys have to compile, and in addition to that, so many of you have had to undertake construction to make this happen. That makes sense. Most of our clients assess up to 30 new medications a year, 71% of the people we've discussed this with. And this was just the CDC estimates that 8 million people per year are exposed to hazardous drugs, and only 82% of the people that we ask underestimated that number. So it's a bigger deal than we think it is, which makes it even more important that we're ready when November 1st hits. So here are a few things that we've learned so far. Formulary versus non-formulary. Well, you know, we're a company that came into this world on the formulary side, publishing formularies online. So that's where we come from. So initially we thought, oh, this is going to be a subset of the formulary. Well, what we've learned as time has marched on, it is not that at all. Your hazardous drug list is a hazardous drug list, and it contains far more than your formulary probably does. And you have to have it like that just because you have so many medications that come in with patients, and nurses need to know how to handle that. We've learned that with assessments of risk, we've seen some people who do assessments of risk on every drug. We've seen some people who do assessments of risk on 2 or 3 drugs, and maybe 5. And then when they start getting those meetings with the VP of Finance asking why the PPE costs are climbing so high, we see more assessments of risk being created. So that is an ever-evolving philosophy on those assessments of risk. We have clients who've gone with an NIOSH 2016, and we've got NIOSH 2020. Charlene's going to talk a little bit about that in a minute when she talks about what she learned yesterday with the USP 800 meeting. And How do you know what drugs to add? That is such a question because, NIOSH has updated the list most recently, March of 2022. So one of the questions that we get regularly is, how do we know, how do we assess these drugs? What we've done, just because there's not a lot of conversation around this, we've actually, on our Twitter account, we have started posting whenever one of our clients asks us to add a drug to the hazardous drug list in our main database, we actually tweet that out. We do that not saying that we're the authority on anything, but just saying, hey, everyone, we had a client add this to their list. Maybe you want to think about adding it to yours. Another disturbing fact to me is the fact that in 50% of the cases that we've seen, the designated person is no longer with the organization. And it's very important that whoever's creating this organization, there's more than one person that understands what it is, where it is, and how it all came together. Because if a person with that kind of institutional knowledge leaves the organization, you're pretty lost. And one more thing that we've learned is you have that designated person. Perhaps you have a committee of people who are in charge of creating all of this information around hazardous drugs. And we see that, but then we see once that is done, once all of those decisions have been made, oftentimes this job moves to the people who are in charge of formulary or med use policy. That's what we see as our customers have implemented this information. So does anyone have any questions to get started? Here's one. And it's from an anonymous person. What's the largest hazardous drugs list that you have seen? And I am going to ask Charlene that question.
Thank you. So the largest one that we have seen with the clients that we have implemented is in the mid 300s. I want to say 365. That client was very active in assessing every new drug that came through the door. So, of course, their list grew emphatically from that. And then the smallest is probably in the 50 to 60 range. And those are usually clients that don't have an infusion center. They don't handle a lot of the IV medications, and most of what they have are the simple sub-Q injections or oral solids and liquids.
All right. Thank you very much, Charlene, and thank you for the question. So now we're going to switch to Charlene because Charlene sat in on that USP 800 meeting that happened yesterday, and she's going to share with us some of the things that she learned there. So here it is to you, Charlene.
Thank you, Laura. First of all, let me just say that I am happy to be here today on this brief little webinar with all of you instead of on an 8-hour deep dive into 800. This was the 5th USP hosted session that I've attended related to 800. And most of what was discussed yesterday was not new, with the exception of highlighting the fact that 800 will soon be enforceable. I had previously read an article where someone was quoted stating that there would be a 6-month grace period between the official date of 797 and the date that 800 would become enforceable. Turns out this is not true. 800 will automatically be enforceable once 797 becomes official. So November 1st, 2023 is the date we all need to be looking at. Here's a question that always seems to come up. If I create one assessment of risk for a group of drugs, will that meet the standard for that group of drugs? The answer is always the same, and it is no. If you choose to create an AOR, it must show that each drug was evaluated individually, including different dosage forms for the same drug. NIOSH 2016 is still the official list, there is still no expected release date for the 2020 list to be finalized. One thing that was pointed out is that just because it's not on the NIOSH list doesn't mean it's not harmful. A substance may be on the EPA list and needs to follow precautions, as EPA regulations are enforceable as well. A lot of reference was made to should and must. I'm sure you've all heard about how these two words have substantial meaning in USP chapters. As a matter of fact, we have published 2 blogs on this topic. We've all heard a lot about medical surveillance. Well, medical surveillance is a should, as far as 800 is concerned, but is definitely a best practice recommendation. And here's an interesting statement that was made yesterday. Information in 800 that is not mentioned or referenced in 795 or 797 is not federally enforceable, driving home the point that these are all pieces of a USP compendium. For example, since neither 795 or 797 address administration, information in 800 surrounding administration is therefore not federally enforceable. However, you need to be aware of what your state and local regulatory agencies are enforcing. There was a lot to unpack, but we'll talk more about specifics in our upcoming webinar series. I'll turn it back over to you, Laura.
Thank you, Charlene. And now we have our first poll. So throughout this, as Carrie mentioned, we're going to have some polls. And here's the first one. Do you feel your organization is prepared for November 1st, 2023 enforcement of USP 800? So if you all would answer that question, I will be very quiet, perhaps, maybe, as you answer that question.
We'll give it a few more seconds just so everyone can answer.
All right, I'm going to end the poll now, and we're going to share the results. So out of the 9 people who answered, 11% said yes and 89% said no. Oh my, okay. You'll have my phone number at the end of this, so you can call me. Okay? We can help you. And I'm not joking, listen to these next webinars because there's really good stuff coming. And now we're back to Charlene, who's going to tell us a little bit about 797, 795, and 800.
Thank you. As you all probably know, USP 800 has been official since December of 2019, but as informational only and not compendially applicable. Informational means that it is not required and does not contain any mandatory tests and assays unless otherwise specified by regulators and enforcement bodies. There's the statement that allows regulators to make their own decisions about whether to inspect or ask questions related to USP 800. 800 is informational and not compendially applicable because it is not referenced in general notices, a monograph, or other applicable general chapters numbered below 1,000. In the latest revision of 795 and 797, one of the pieces that had to be addressed was that any mention of drug handling information was removed and replaced with references to 800, therefore making it compendially applicable. Here are just a couple of examples from the newly revised 797. Handling of sterile hazardous HDs or hazardous drugs must additionally comply with the hazardous drug handling in healthcare settings, 800. Another one is if compounding an HD, appropriate personnel or personal protective equipment must be worn and disposed in accordance with 800. So you see how they're doing that. They've taken out the explanation or the information about that topic and just said, look here for that. Is it enforceable right now, today? No. As of November 1st, 2023. That's it. Does it stand alone? As of today, USP 800 stands alone. However, since 795, 797, and 800 are all relational now, or as of 11/1, they are part of the USP compendium. Since 795 and 797 now reference 800, they're a package deal, as one is not applicable without the other. Back to you, Laura.
Thank you, Charlene. Another poll, and the question is, have you been inspected in the last 2 years? And were you asked any questions about USP 800? All right. And I'm going to end the poll now. And the answer is 38% say yes, they've been inspected and have been asked questions, and 63% say no, which is very interesting. When we look at this and we talk to our clients in various states, and I think that's my next slide. So let me just go there. Oh, okay. Well, let me talk about that for a second. So what we're seeing in our clients is that the state boards are the ones asking the questions, and Joint Commission just kind of hints around on it. And with that, I'm going to let Charlene talk about who is inspecting.
Thanks again, Laura. Let's look at who's inspecting. State and federal agencies, as well as accreditation agencies, have had the option to ask questions or look at your readiness for 800 since the chapter was made official at the end of 2019. This may include, but not be limited to, the Board of Pharmacy, OSHA, or Joint Commission. Come November 1st of this year, it's open season on 800. USP is continuing to engage regulators and keep them informed of the compendial status of the chapters. However, USP itself plays no role in enforcement. A recent statement from Dr. Robert Campbell from Joint Commission is that, quote, Joint Commission will only write standards to the musts. We are not going to hold you accountable for the shoulds, end quote. So when you read 800, keep an eye out for those musts and shoulds. Don't make the goals in your SOPs more difficult to obtain than they need to be. Dr. Campbell also pointed out that there may be some pretty stiff requirements surrounding documentation, and quote, wherever it says to document something, see that you're doing that, end quote. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you, Charlene. That's such good information. And so PPP did a survey of pharmacy directors a couple of years ago, and this is what they saw. And this has gone up since this survey in 2021. 2 out of 10 CMS inspections are asking about USP 800. 3 out of 10 accreditation inspections, and 4 out of 10 state board inspections. I can tell you from just talking to clients across the US, we're seeing more and more of these state inspectors come in and ask questions. I know in the state of Ohio, they started issuing citations in August of 2022. So this is something where you're going to only see more of, and you're going to see a lot of this happening in your state. I know in Iowa, prior to COVID, they had hired new inspectors, I think 40 new inspectors for this particular topic. in November of 2019, and then COVID hit. And I don't know what happened to those inspectors, but boy, they were really gearing up for it. So if you've got, after this is all said and done, if you've got any information about your particular state and what's going on, it would be so fascinating. Please email me and tell me. I would just love to hear it, because seeing what's happening from state to state is just absolutely fascinating. And then we have one more poll. And the question is, where are you finding answers to your USP 800 questions? And you have a series of a multiple choice. So all of the above, none of the above. Gee, I wish I knew. And once again, if you're not familiar with the blog that we do, there's a lot of really good information on that. And truthfully, believe it or not, we're not trying to sell you anything on those blogs. They're very informational. So if you're looking for a source that may give you some more resources, look at that sometime if you have a moment. So we've got, I'm ending the poll. I'm going to share the results. So out of 9 people, 22% go to USP and 78% go to all of the above. And that's excellent, just excellent. And do we have any more questions? Has anyone got any more questions? Here's one. Oh, do you know if any states are already inspecting? Well, yeah, just answered that one. But yes, I know for sure about Ohio, Washington State and Oregon are, but their State Board of Pharmacy has been pretty intense for a long time. But if any of you have any more information you'd like to share, we would love to hear it. And then finally, that's the end of what we're going to talk to you about today. Our goal with these webinars has been to keep it brief, because we appreciate the time that you're giving us, and we know that you don't have a lot of time. So just to review, next week, we're going to talk about the gap analysis, where when we get the information from a client, typically in the form of an Excel spreadsheet, how do we process that? And what do we find when we start going through all of their information, assessments of risk, requirements of drugs? We have a QR code right here where you guys can just take a picture of that QR code. You can go to this area and register for any of the upcoming webinars. You can also ask us to schedule a demo if you want to know any more information about our software, Arhus Drugs. So just let us know. And if there's something that you'd like to hear more about, let us know that too. So let me say thank you to Shirlene for sharing your knowledge, your vast knowledge with us today. Thank you, Carrie Fleming, for being such a wonderful facilitator. And thank you to all of you for taking time out of your busy days to join us. I hope you learned something new. And if there's anything you want to know more about, just send us an email and let us know. As a reminder, we're going to send you the question and answers. There's going to be a link to our YouTube channel. So if you got in late or you wanted to hear something Shirlene had to say, you can go to our YouTube channel and this will be up there. You can also follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn. And Twitter, so that you can hear what our customers are doing with new drugs being added to the database. And I want to thank you again for all of your time and your attention. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much.